Hello and welcome to Checking the Vitals, a podcast powered by SpecialtyCare. I'm Todd Schlosser, and in our next Heart of the Operation series episode, we talk to TJ Ricklefs, an area clinical manager on SpecialtyCare's Appleton, Wisconsin perfusion team. We discuss what led him to pursue a career in perfusion, how the perfusion job market has changed since he entered it in the late 1990s, and how having perfusionists involved in the hospital's heart program initiatives leads to improved patient outcomes. Enjoy the conversation. So joining me today is TJ Ricklefs. He's a clinical manager for perfusion at SpecialtyCare. And thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'd like to start off with this question. And it is simply, what is it that made you decide, hey, I want to have a career in healthcare?
It's kind of interesting. When I was in high school, I didn't have a lot of direction until probably my junior year. And that's when I started taking advanced biology classes. So I kind of realized that my drive was and my passion was in science. So I went to my undergrad at Iowa State to study biology. And with kind of the idea of as I went along, I'd figure out what I wanted to do. And teaching was one of the first things that was in my mind, but I just wasn't sure. And so I did my undergrad. I made sure I had my pre-med prerequisites taken care of.
Sure.
That was also an option. And then as I approached the end of my junior year, I started looking at options and kind of had decided to apply to possibly med school and possibly for a PharmD degree. And so then as I went through my senior year, I kind of decided that college was great, but I wasn't looking forward to another 15 years of it.
Sure.
And so that kind of took medical school off the table. So I narrowed it down to my PharmD degree or my master's in biology to teach. And then in December of my senior year, I got a random flyer from the University of Iowa Perfusion Technology Program. Middle of my senior year, I get this flyer from Iowa and says, "Oh, please look at perfusion technology. We'd love to have you." So, of course, it's 1991, almost 1992. I went on what was then the internet and was able to find out that perfusionists did some stuff that had to do with using veins to bypass blockages on the heart.
Sure.
And that was pretty much the extent of it and sounded interesting. So I applied, and I actually applied to 3 different programs at Iowa. Ended up being accepted to the master's program, the pharmacy program, and the perfusion program, and chose perfusion. So it was very happenstance and very different than it is these days with the internet and the access that people have and actually know what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we need to do is a better job marketing those positions to let people know that those jobs are available. Because for someone like you who loved school, didn't love it enough to do 15 more years of it, I mean, and of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like perfusion was a great career path for you.
Oh, no question. I mean, I've said many times to people that if I could snap my fingers and change it, I wouldn't do it. And the reality is, we got to be lucky sometimes, right? And I got lucky and made the right choice. And I kind of joke with everybody when, obviously my friends and family all know what I do now. But when I meet new people or meet patients, when I go to talk to them before surgery, they'll say, "Oh, I didn't even know that existed." And I said, "Yeah, unfortunately, you really don't want to know someone like me." And because that means you're about to have heart surgery. So, it's kind of one of those, you want to bump into us in a social environment, not at work.
Absolutely. So you graduate and then you sort of enter the job market. What was it like when you entered the job market? Because I realize right now there's a perfusion shortage. So I'm not saying it's easy to get a perfusion job, but with it being a shortage, people are really trying to do they're really trying to recruit those positions. Was it like that when you came out was it mid-90s when you graduated perfusion school?
Yeah, so I graduated perfusion school in 98, actually.
Okay,
so
late
earlier
90s.
I said 91, 92. I actually meant 95, 96. I was 4 years off. Surprise, surprise. But yeah, so I graduated perfusion school in 98. And then, so actually, one of the people I had come into contact with at the University of Iowa was Marcy Michaels, and she was somebody who worked for Baxter. At the time, it was Baxter, and she told me that there were some jobs available and had me look at them. And I interviewed down in Lexington, and I interviewed up in Appleton, Wisconsin, and was offered both jobs and liked them both, but wanted to be closer to home in Iowa. So I took the Appleton, Wisconsin job. But there were a few jobs out there, but the demand, the market would have been opposite of what it is now. It was, there's jobs there, but you're going to take the job when you find it.
Sure.
Not you're going to have 7 jobs to choose from, and you just pick.
So you started working on the clinical side in 98 or around 1998, and you mentioned that you had a passion
Yep.
for teaching.
Yep.
Is that something that you've sort of incorporated into what you do in perfusion?
Actually, absolutely, yes. So when I came out of school in '98, I was in Appleton for 2.5 years, and then I took an opportunity to go to Omaha. So once I was down in Omaha, I was about 4 years out of school, and then I took over as the chief perfusionist down there.
Oh, okay.
So then that gave me the opportunity to reach out to the University of Nebraska that was starting a perfusion program. So I was able to do some of their didactic teaching and their labs. So it actually the first opportunity I had to get involved in teaching, I was able to do that pretty quickly, which was very rewarding, and I still do that to this day. And so pretty much every location I've been in, I've tried to get students in. I haven't been successful at all of them, but most of them I have, and that includes where I am now. So now we currently teach students from Rush. So we get 3 of their students every clinical year, and it gives us a great opportunity to not only help the profession and kind of give them an experience of. One of the things that students, I think, suffer from is they don't always get the experience of hospital-based perfusion versus contract perfusion.
Right.
And their opinions on contract perfusion and or hospital-based perfusion are based on what the other side tells them.
Yes.
And yep. And so, we're luckily able to literally bring them in, let them experience and see what we do. And I can tell you of the 5 students that we've had, only one returned to Saudi Arabia where she was from, and another one took another job, but we hired 3 of the 5. And
wow.
so,
Okay.
Yep. So, it just shows that being able to let them live and see how we work and how our company works and how our days are, and they can then compare it to most of the programs they go to are hospital based.
If it's okay, let me ask a little bit about that. You said you had these students for a year?
So they come in. So what they do is they have their clinical year. And during that time, at least with the Rush program, they have 3 clinical rotations, 3 different sites. So we'll get 1 student for each of those 3 clinical rotations. So they'll come in, I can't remember if it's either for 10 or 12 weeks. And they come here and then they move on and we get another student. So it's very rewarding. Rush has been a great partner with us for that. And it's something that myself and my team enjoy a lot because it gives us an opportunity to kind of work with the upcoming group of perfusionists because for us, it's the next generation, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have them for those 10 to 12 weeks, is it all hands-on? Is it lectures? Is it they're following you when you're going into these cases and sort of standing over your shoulder and maybe not getting hands-on, but, witnessing you do it firsthand? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So basically, by the time they get to us, they've done all of their learning in their virtual lab. So Rush and a lot of the schools use a virtual lab to do virtual cases. So they have a lot of hands-on didactic work and hands-on lab work. But clinically, especially for the first rotation, clinically they are very novice. And so when they come to us, it's see one, do them all. And so, yep. And it is, they will watch one case and at least for me, typically they'll be sitting behind the arterial head halfway through that case. and
Okay.
they will learn. Obviously, we're hovering
Sure. Yeah.
and teaching, but it's trial. It's literal true clinicals, trial by fire, and so they hit the ground running. And by the time they leave us, they're capable of doing way more than they were when they got here. So that's what
Absolutely.
we want to see.
These are not people who are like fresh in school for
Nope.
perfusion. They're
Nope.
almost done, I'd imagine.
Yes, this is so their 3 clinical rotations are their last things.
Okay.
And when they're done with their clinical rotations, they then go take their test, finalize their thesis, because Rush is a master's program,
Okay.
and they graduate, and that's it.
Okay. So let me just ask you, when someone who's a student for those 10 to 12 weeks comes to you and asks, well, what are the differences between a contract and a hospital program? What are those differentiators that you tell them or talk about?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I've been a contractor for most of my career, aside of about a year. But obviously, most of my friends are hospital-based perfusionists.
Sure.
So the biggest difference that I tell them is that in some hospitals, and this isn't true for all of them, but in some hospitals, there's a very thick layer of politics involved between departments. And one of the things that I do like about being a contract group is that you are somewhat insulated from those. Obviously, there's the disadvantage of you're running on a contract, and those contracts have to be renewed. They could be canceled. But the reality is, when you're a good clinical partner with these hospitals, they're not going to cancel your contract any more than they're going to cancel the contract they have with their independent docs.
Yeah.
If you're providing good quality work and taking care of their patients and working with them on the different metrics and all of the goals that they have from a programmatic standpoint, it's your job. And you're as much, honestly, they look at us as much as a hospital-based person as a hospital-based person. And I've been at hospitals before where I've been there a couple of years, and it'll come up and they'll say, "Oh, you don't work directly for our hospital?" Nope, no, I'm independent. And so it's kind of interesting that way, because people just don't see us as contractors; they see us as members of the team.
Yeah. Would you say that the job security for contractors versus a hospital group is sort of about the same then? Just because, if you're providing all the correct quality care as a contractor, they're going to want to keep you as much as someone who is working at that group and also doing the job sort of correctly to the best of their ability. And,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much the same, and I say it's the same because there's advantages on both sides, right?
Sure.
So hospital-based people, they're somewhat protected because they work for the hospital.
Right.
That being said, they're just as vulnerable to staffing cutbacks as any department is.
Yeah.
And they're expected to put in their hours. They're analyzed and all those things. So they can see staff cuts just like we can. We have a contract that we have to maintain, but again, that I don't view that any differently than potential staffing cuts.
Yeah.
And I'll give you one example of how I feel that there's an advantage in contract perfusion. One of the hospitals that I used to work at and at that time it was Fresenius, was in Omaha, and we actually lost that hospital due to political infighting between surgeon groups. And so we lost that account, and I literally had so many jobs to choose from.
Yeah.
Because when you work for a big contractor, just because of general churn, there's always opportunities.
Yeah.
New accounts, retirements, adding staff to new areas. All those things happen, and it's especially when you're younger. And at that time, I was in my mid-20s. The fact that I had 3 chief jobs to choose from, and that wasn't even talking about the general staff jobs if I wanted to go back to being a staff perfusionist.
Yeah.
So, and all those were within 12 hours of where I was at the time. And so, that's a huge advantage that in the back of your mind, everybody always keeps worst case scenario in mind.
Absolutely.
I've never, ever worried about having a job. And because I know that if something happened where I was, there would be a good job available for me to transfer to within a reasonable distance from where I was with specialty care or the other contract companies I worked with.
Yeah. So it's job security on a much larger scale, right? Because if you're in a hospital group and infighting causes staff reductions, or anything causes staff reductions, as I'm sure you are aware, a lot of rural health centers have been closing over the past 15 years. And with that, I mean, it's not just perfusionists, but everyone's sort of losing the jobs in that situation. So with,
Yep.
contractor groups, you may have to move. You may not have to move far, but there's always jobs available, especially with the perfusionist shortage that we're sort of dealing with right now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So let me ask this. You obviously have been working in perfusion for a good number of years, since, I guess early
98.
2000s, 98, so late
98.
90s.
Yep.
So 22 years, right? What are some of the
Yep.
bigger changes that you've seen in the realm of perfusion?
That's actually a really good question. Um, One of the things that I noticed as the years went by is our profession has changed, and I think
Yeah.
many of the people who have been in it for over 15 to 20 years will agree with that. And some people view that change as bad. I personally view that change as very positive. And most of the changes have involved perfusion being involved in more than just pumping a case.
Yeah.
And yep, and that's something that um, from the beginning, I always did some traveling work to help out at certain accounts. And so I actually enjoyed doing that. And when we lost that account in Omaha, I actually chose not to take a job for a year, and I started a locums company and did locums work for a year. And just because I didn't want to move at the time,
Sure.
and it worked well, and I had a lot of experience. So the advantage that gave me was seeing how perfusionists do things all throughout the country. And I've provided perfusion services to 31 hospitals now, and in my career, and having that to kind of think back on. There's good things and bad things, but the nice part is you take the good things and you
Yeah.
apply them to your own practice. And one of the things I noticed when I would go to those places, the best run programs, the perfusionists were involved with the program, the heart program, not just the perfusion program. And that involved things like cell savers, patient quality outcomes, blood management techniques in the entire health system. Those are things that I think perfusionists need to involve themselves in. Obviously, as we go forward with transcatheter options for valve replacements and things like that, our jobs are going to continue to morph, and we need to change with them. And we have experience in a very unique arena that other professions that we work with don't have, particularly with blood.
Yeah.
And we need to show those health systems that we bring more to the table other than somebody who sits behind a pump and turns a knob. And that's something I've always focused on. At the account that I'm at now, I actually sit on the blood management committee for the entire health system.
Oh, wow.
And so, involving yourself in that, involving yourself in quality outcomes, not just for the OR, but for the ICU and for the entire perioperative stay for the patients. And we bring things to the table that other people don't, and it's another perspective. So if you're on groups that have that, you're going to have a better program for it in the long run, because the more perspectives you have, you dot your I's and cross your T's.
Sure. Now, I'd imagine that a lot of the ways that it's changed over the course of your career have been things like the advent of new technologies, new techniques. And how do you, as someone who's already graduated school, brush up on what has come into perfusion after you were formally trained?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm kind of a prolific reader, and
Okay.
I was kind of blessed with the fact that when I read something, I don't forget it most of the time.
Yeah.
And so as I read through this stuff, and it helps in the area of quality as well, that when you're reading that stuff, you keep up with it. And as I've gone through working particularly with my director of operations, Dennis Brancato, one of the things we've always done is try to keep on the front of changes within our profession, using the more advanced pumps. And the reason the more advanced pumps, it's not their bells and whistles. It's the fact that they're safer. They have
Right.
auto clamps. They have more advanced bubble detectors. They have auto regulation with their roller heads. All those things. You take the MPS into consideration, the microplegia. When you use something like this, compared to 1998 when I came out, where literally you couldn't leave a 5-foot radius from the pump because your reservoir might empty and pump air to the patient.
Yeah.
We're literally in a different, we're on a different planet now. Now we have pumps that you almost have to actively sabotage yourself to be able to sabotage yourself.
Right.
And that's important, right? Because everybody goes, oh, well, that's never happened to me. Well, that's great, but sometime it will.
Yeah.
And when you have a pump that has a safety device, then your patient's safe. And that's what it comes down to. And so I think embracing that and bringing it to the forefront within, again, your program, and saying, you know what, we need to look at going forward with microplegia. We need to look at going forward with custodial, which is a great option in some programs with minimally invasive valve programs. So I think staying on the cutting edge of that allows you to, again, be that clinical partner that these hospitals are looking for, not just to pump a case, but to help their program as a whole.
Sure. And you would just say reading is the best way to keep up with that? Is it, are there?
Well, meetings and reading, one of the things I've always done, and luckily we're actually in a time now where these state meetings and these regional meetings are unbelievably good compared to what they used to be.
Right.
And you used to go to a state meeting in the early 2000s, and there were 35 people sitting in a room talking about a couple articles, and now these state meetings have a couple hundred people, and they're worth 40 points. They're worth as many points or almost as many points as these large national meetings. So I think I've always made myself go to these bigger meetings because you're coming into contact with more perfusionists.
Sure.
And and learning and talking to them about what are they doing. And then not only that, you have all the vendors at the bigger meetings, and you can get hands on some of this new equipment that you've been reading about.
Yeah.
Reading about it's one thing, but you need to lay hands on it.
Absolutely.
Yep. And I think that, is a huge plus. And then now on top of it, we have the ability to attend these meetings virtually, which, even though you can't lay hands on things, at least you can connect with the newest and the best research and stay on top of things. Even in the environment of COVID that we're in now, look at how we're communicating ECMO and how we're doing ECMO. What's working at this account? What's working at that account?
Right.
Those are all things that, when we tie in that technology into what we do, even when we're limited geographically because we can't travel or don't want to travel.
Yeah.
We're able to stay on the cutting edge of what's going on. And we're very lucky that, we have that in a time like that we're going through right now.
Yeah. And I wanted to come back to something you had mentioned earlier, just because I want to know more about it. But you said you were on the board of your blood management program for the hospital system. Is that, is it uncommon for someone who is a contractor to be on that sort of a board at the hospital system level?
I mean, I think maybe in some places. I do know of people in our company and for other contractors that are involved at that level. I think it's something that and I say we because I'm been in the profession for over 20 years. Sure. I think it's something that we have to constantly push ourselves as the more experienced group to involve ourselves in, not get caught in that rut and to constantly expand out and reach out to try and involve ourselves at those different layers. And when you do that, not only are you providing more value to the hospital in your relationship, but you're actually building more relationships with other areas within the hospital, laboratory, blood banking, ICU, critical care, cancer, all of those places. And then when they have issues, say somebody wants to do platelet gel or someone wants to do bone marrow aspirate, or things of that nature. They go, oh yeah, I sit on the blood management committee with one of the perfusionists. Let me give them a call. And having those people know who you are is very important, because we bring more to the table than sitting behind a pump. And I think it's important to get our name and out there, and so that people recognize that we have those areas, those skill sets that we can bring to the table.
It's very interesting that it's sort of used almost as a networking type function, even though you're sitting on a board to, I'm assuming, help the hospital system with better blood management. But
Yep.
because of that, it increases your exposure. And then because of the increased exposure, you become more vital to the health system. I mean, that seems like it's something that anyone would do, whether you're a contractor or a hospital employee. Anyone would want to do that.
Right, for sure. And I'll give you an example of some of the benefits from it is when people are used to seeing you in meetings and
Yeah.
talking to you and working with you. For example, one of the hospitals I'm in now is going through a hiring period of bringing in new cardiologists and a new surgeon, and they're asking me to be involved in those interviews. And that's a big help, because it involves us. Then we meet these people. We get a chance to work with these people, because they're the ones we're going to be working with in the future. And if you establish those relationships, and it's not just with the surgeons, right? It's the cardiologists, the intensivists, the laboratory people. All of those things are important. And they can, not only are we helping them, but they're immense helps. If we're having a problem with a blood banking issue, I don't go to the OR manager and say, hey, you need to do something about this. I call up the blood bank manager and say, hey, can we meet and talk about this? And,
Sure.
you remove those barriers when you know them,
Yeah.
when they're your colleagues, on a weekly, monthly basis, that you can call them up and sit down and talk. And yeah, honestly, it removes a lot of the red tape that you would normally get if you were kind of siloed, within the CVOR arena.
I'd imagine that, as you've progressed through your career and now have 20 plus years in perfusion, that you sort of get busier and busier, especially as you start to take on more sort of leadership positions within that hospital system. So what are some things that you do to sort of relax and sort of take care of yourself to make sure that when you are on the job, you can give, your full 100%?
Yeah, that's interesting, especially in the time of COVID, right?
Yeah.
So like many, my kids are a lot of my free time. I have a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old. I was a little later to the kid game, so they tire me out a little bit more than some of my buddies who chose to do that 10 years before me.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of my time with them, pretty exclusively, and it's one of the reasons my wife and I, we were in the Chicago area for 10 years, and one of the reasons we moved up to Wisconsin was to kind of get back to a smaller town atmosphere where I grew up in, and similar to it anyway, to raise the boys. And then I also happen to own a restaurant, and
Oh, wow.
yep, and a liquor store, and then another property management business back home in Iowa. And so that takes up a lot of my free time as well. And I own it with very, very close friends, and so it's I'm able to do the books and things like that. And it's honestly, it's work, but it's a nice distraction, because it's a complete disconnect from what I do at work, in the hospital every
I'd
day.
imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah, so even though it's work, it is a way to unplug as well. So
Yeah.
those are kind of the things that occupy my time when I'm away from the hospital.
Well, excellent. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today here on Checking the Vitals. I really appreciate it.
No problem. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to Checking the Vitals. If you enjoyed the content we provide, please leave us a 5-star rating and review. It really does help people find the show. And make sure you subscribe so you hear our interviews with healthcare innovators every Monday.